It's election season, and people are running for judge. Why would anybody want to be a judge? Well, we're going to get right to that in a minute. Stay tuned. Hi, this is Scott Weinberg, and welcome to Lawyer's View. We are continuing our coverage of judges and the courts today. I've interviewed many people who run for office over the years, Senate, Congress, the sheriff, but the ones who run for judge always interest me because they end up with, quite frankly, the most control. They get to decide who's right, who's wrong, and many times, as we all know, if someone goes to jail. Some people would say they have the most powerful elected office in our land. Today we're joined by another individual, a bright young man, Josh Arnkoff, who's running for judge in the 48th District Court here in Bloomfield, Michigan. He's a graduate of Wayne State Undergraduate Law School and currently assistant prosecuting attorney in Oakland County, Michigan. Thanks for coming to the show, Josh.
Thanks for having me.
So, as I've talked to several different people running for judge in the county, why do you want to run for judge?
Well, the idea first came to me several years ago, probably more than 5 years ago, by several defense attorneys saying that I should run for judge. They obviously knew me because I'd been a defense attorney prior to becoming a prosecutor, and then I was on the other side, and they said that I should run, especially in the 48th District Court. And of course I thought about it. At the time, I didn't think I'd had enough experience, but now after more experience being on the defense side, over 9 years being in the Oakland County Prosecutor's Office as a prosecutor, I felt I can take my experiences as a defense attorney and actually representing people, and then I can take my experience as a prosecutor and helping victims and make sure that justice is being served, and actually put that together as a judge, a complete picture, and help people to the best of my ability.
Okay, now that's my softball question. Because the harder thing that I wanted you to talk about in running for judge is, you know, it's a powerful position. I mean, wouldn't you agree? The judges, quite frankly, they have more power than the prosecutor, even though the prosecutor, you know, they have that executive power. They can sign for a warrant on people, they can get people arrested, but the judge really has, I think, the most powerful position. Do you feel that you said you wanted to run for district court judge in 48th? Why that court?
Specifically in the 48th District Court, number one, it's the community where I grew up in, and now it's the community where I live. I have 3 wonderful daughters that now live in this community, and I want them to grow up in a court where they can respect and be proud of to be in that court. So obviously when you're running at the district level, I believe the court, it's the people's court, it's the community's court. This is where judges, I think, can make the most difference with people because they're really dealing with the people in the community. So if you want to have that effect and make your community a better place, what better place to do it than at the local district court?
It's really true because the district courts, I mean, obviously circuit court handles the entire county, but it's the local district court that, you know your police force, you know the local shop owner in the corner. You really have the most contact, but it's what you were talking about before. It's the schools, because the judges that end up going to the schools a lot, and I know your boss, the prosecutor, ends up going to the schools too.
Yes.
They have, I think, the most influence.
And they do. And I remember when I was at Andover High School several years ago, I remember seeing the courts in school actually taking place. I was walking down the hallway and I saw my uncle, Howard Arnkoff, who was a defense attorney. He was waiting outside, and I noticed the court was going on in the school. And I thought that was just a fabulous thing, bringing courts to schools to, you know, to show the kids how it works, because I mean, they might be there on a ticket, or they may want to be a prosecutor, they may want to be a defense attorney or a judge, and what better exposure for them than having it in the schools.
But you know, that makes it difficult too, because when you're a judge, besides the issue of having to recuse yourself if it's a family member, you know many people in that local system. You know families, you'll potentially have to judge people that you've known or their kids. I mean, you might have to do that. And I know we talked about the issue of what happens if you get, let's say, a teenager who has an MIP. I mean, that's one of the things. There's so many minors in possession cases that go through all these district courts. I mean, how do you deal with someone that you know the family and you still have to be tough?
Right, and you do have to be tough, and I think minor in possession, especially in this community, hot button issue, especially as it relates to the court.
Why is it such a hot button issue? Everybody talks about those. Tell us why.
It does seem to be the hot button issue because it seems to be disproportionate treatment in this community than you might see anywhere else on how minors in possession are being dealt with. There's the argument that the kids shouldn't be going to jail, and the counter argument to that was they're not going to jail on the MIP charge, they're going to jail for contempt of court for violating their probation.
Right.
But I mean, from what I hear and what people are telling me is that the probation is set up for them to fail, that they're not going to ever make it through. And it seems like in this area, these cities and townships that make up this court, it seems like the probation, the sentences, and what's happening is completely different from anywhere else in the county, let alone the entire state. And when you talk to the parents, you know, they understand. They said, when my kid gets an MIP here versus they get an MIP up in Ann Arbor or up in East Lansing or wherever it is, they're being treated differently, and that really upsets a lot of the parents.
You know, that's one of the things that we've talked about with different people running for office, and especially judge, is how different judges are in the state. I mean, they're different even in the same court. I mean, you can have, even in 48th District, there's 3 different judges. You can have Rochester Court. You can have where there are more than one judge, and one judge will do something different than the other. I was talking to, we were talking about the Farmington Court, and where one judge can have sobriety court,
right,
and the next one doesn't. And that's really a big difference on it. Do you think there should all be the same treatment, or is it okay that one judge would treat another one different?
You would think you'd want to have the same treatment because, you know, if you're going to a court that has multiple judges, it's the luck of the draw at that point on what's going to happen to you. And that really doesn't seem fair. Are you the one who gets the judge with the sobriety court, or are you the one who gets the judge without it? And is that fair to the person? Now, I think both judges over there are fabulous, though,
right,
regardless of whether or not they have the sobriety
I like
court.
them both, too. But you know what? It's funny because one of the things is people say, well, if you go into sobriety court, let's say, sobriety court, of course, will have it run much more of it's almost like an AA meeting, but much more hands-on,
right,
constant contact between the judge and the offender who's now in the sobriety court,
right,
but they have to go through a lot of hoops to be able to complete their program. Sometimes it's even a longer probation. Sometimes it's even a tougher probation.
Right, and being someone who wants to bring a sobriety court into my courtroom, I've certainly done a lot of research on this, and you do see people who say at the onset of sobriety court, they think, you know what, I think maybe I'd rather have jail, or maybe I'd rather have just some standard probation because this is really tough. But as they get through it, they see the benefit of it and realize how great it is. And even though, yes, maybe it was tougher than even a 30-day jail stay or being on standard probation, in the end it worked for them and they were glad they stuck through it.
We're going to take a break, but after the break, I want you to tell me why you think that the 48th District Court can benefit from you being judge there. We'll be right back.
Never look a howler monkey in the eye.
Fried ants are delicious.
We finished a clinic in a rainstorm.
Really?
My students actually ended up teaching me. In la keg, a la king. Think managing a sales team is tough. Try working with 5 different villages. After 2 months, I was ready to quit, but after 2 years, I didn't want to leave. I didn't know I had it in me.
Turn 2 years of service into a lifetime of experience. To all the Peace Corps volunteers, past, present, and future, thank you for your service to your country and the world.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Scott Weinberg, on Lawyer's View. We're talking about judges. We're talking to Josh Arnkoff, who's running for the 48th District Court. Josh, so courts are run really by administrators. I mean, they really have a professional person who is running it on the day-to-day basis. But the tenet of a court, the feeling of a court, is usually set by the judges there. What do you think you can bring to the 48th District Court?
I can bring a lot of things. Obviously, as we talked about earlier, I want to bring a drug and sobriety court to my courtroom. I was reading an article recently by a prosecutor in Montana talking about sobriety courts, and he was talking about how he said, you know, in law school, they didn't teach him about drug addiction. They didn't teach him about dysfunctional families and alcohol dependency and all this kind of stuff. And he realized that I need to get involved with this because this is how we can really help treat people. So one of the major benefits is bringing the drug and sobriety court, because all the studies show, number one, they reduce crime. Number two, they reduce money, costs to the taxpayers. I mean, what more can you want than a reduction in crime and reduction in costs?
You know, that's really true, though, with these courts. And I've represented clients for 25 years and thousands of clients, and it's always every client gets something different out of the court. They might have a substance abuse problem, and they'll get a judge who is extremely involved in the rehabilitation. You get judges who, quite frankly, want to punish. They say, our job as the court is not necessarily to teach you anything. We're here after you made your choices. And I don't necessarily know if the 48 district court judges are one way or another there, because you know they're pretty involved. Because, for instance, we talked about MIPs.
Right.
They'll put people through an MIP probation program that is more extensive than many other courts. But I think their excuse is it might prevent a drunk driving. Do you think that? Do you think that drunk drivings will start off as MIPs? Is there a relation to that?
I don't think it's probably tough to say that there's an absolute relation to that. I mean, that's one of my biggest things is talk about how every individual is different. I don't believe in cookie cutter sentences, one size fits all type sentences, because everyone's different. Everyone comes from a different background. For some people, standard probation, not a slap on the wrist, but not a heavy-handed type probation is usually sufficient for some people, for some that it's not. I'm not going to come out and say that anyone who has an underage drinking ticket is going to lead to a drunk driving arrest. So, but as you were talking about, I think it is important to educate the community, but we need to be fair in our sentences and not think that overly harsh punishments are going to be what correct future behavior.
You know, one of the things people don't realize until they're involved with the courts is they do a lot of civil work. I mean, how much, there's so much, forget about traffic, which is an inordinate amount of time at the court too, and also money makers for the court. They bring in a lot of money for local courts and local cities. But you'll be doing a lot of civil work.
Right.
Do you feel comfortable doing the civil work?
I feel comfortable doing it. Obviously, my background before joining the prosecutor's office was mostly criminal, but I did do some civil, so I have experience with that. I did do a little bit of family law, some estate planning. I was my own client in a small claims case. I did small claims mediation, actually.
What is the jurisdiction of the district court?
It's for civil under $25,000.
So that's still a lot. I mean, a lot of people sue for less than $25,000.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, one of the things about, you mentioned small claims, is so many of those people come in without lawyers. And it seems that district court judges many times have to, they can't play the role of the lawyer. But you have a small claims, or you have something go in front of the judge, and nobody has a lawyer. You really have to educate them. You have to control the situation. And that really makes sometimes a good district court judge. The ones, I think, and you tell me if you're wrong, that there's no lawyers pressing it, and now you are the one who's handling everything.
Right, and you are, and when I did the small claims mediation, you really get to see it up front, the participants in it. And obviously, of course, the lack of legal education is not there, and that leaves the judge or the magistrate at the time to have to step in, explain what the law is, explain why they're right, explain why they're wrong. And having that experience is certainly going to help. But yeah, they have to take over and make the right decision based on their knowledge of the law.
Well, what I ask you is that if, as you're running, and if you do win, that you act exactly like you say that you would, which is basically be cooperative with the people coming in there and understanding that they do not know the law. So I want to thank you for coming in to the show today. I really know it's not an easy thing to run for judge.
No, it's not.
But I think I think you're doing well with it, and I know you're going to do well if you win. And thank you for coming to the show.
Well, thank you, Scott.
Thank you for another edition of Lawyer's View. My name's Scott Weinberg. We'll see you again.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put that out.
Welcome back to Lawyer's View. I'm your host, Scott Weinberg. You know, we were talking about the courts, running for judge, and the things that we really want to make sure that we get a complete understanding of is taking on the courts, especially when there is corruption. You know, we hear so many different times where an individual feels that they can't beat the system, that they are taken advantage of by the system. And what we want to do is we want to get to the bottom of how can you take on the system? How are there lawyers, for instance, that will? Well, today we are joined with one of the top lawyers in town. His name is David Moffett. He's a graduate of University of Michigan, Go Blue, University of Detroit Mercy Law School, and he's been taking on the government for many, many years on behalf of individuals. He now is a defense attorney, but also a plaintiff attorney when it matters. He's a former Oakland County Board of Commissioners, and I want to welcome him to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be on a show that touches on substantive issues and takes them to the people like your show, Mr. Weinberg.
Well, we're happy to have you. Please call me Scott. So one of the issues is when you have an individual, you have, let's say, even an indigent client who feels that they can't take on the system. You know, we've been defense attorneys for many years too, and let's say they're being prosecuted for something, but they don't have money to hire an attorney, and they feel like, how can the system work for them? How can they get a good attorney?
I think it's extremely difficult, and I think you've touched on one of the areas of real disparity in our country and in the justice system, the fact that you get more justice if you can afford to pay for it. I think the O.J. case brought that home to many people. I think today we see the shortcomings in the appointed attorney, the indigent attorney system, and how poorly those are funded and how difficult it is for an attorney for an indigent individual to provide the kind of quality legal care that a client needs to attempt to oppose the system. And you really need resources to oppose the system today because it's the whole weight of the government.
It's really true. I mean, I've seen so many times where I'll talk to a client. He has an opportunity where he's being prosecuted, he's being accused of a crime. Whether he did it or not, he has the absolute right to have his constitutional rights protected. And yet he's in the system where he's not convinced that if he doesn't go hire his own attorney, that he's going to get a decent attorney. And yet, as we were talking too, some of the best attorneys we know do appellate work. They do work for indigent clients, and yet the public is under the perception too that they're not going to get the best attorney. But that's not always the case, is it?
It's not, because some of the very best attorneys are court-appointed attorneys. They have great experience, they get top cases, and you know, they really do provide quality legal representation, and you can see it in some of the highest profile cases in Oakland County. The trouble is there's just not enough of those attorneys in the court-appointed system to help everybody.
And the money. And you talked about, you know, just for example, let's say you have a murder case, and you have a situation where if you ever retained a client who can afford to hire a private investigator, who can afford to hire a private expert to come testify, that's going to testify against what the government's expert is saying. I mean, that is a clear advantage, whereas you have an indigent client. I mean, sometimes the courts will appoint or give some investigative fees, but that's pretty rare too.
It is rare. My first murder case, I think, was 1988, and it was the freeway killer, at least the one they caught at the time. It was, you know, very high profile at the time, and the prosecution, it was a circumstantial case, and they had innumerable experts. They must have had at least a dozen or more. And I asked the judge, if I filed a motion, could I please hire my own experts in these cases, you know, medical examiner, a forensic firearms examiner, and he said no. He said, I'll give you $200 to buy textbooks on those subjects, and you can cross-examine the prosecution's
it's
experts.
Ridiculous, of course.
No witnesses, he said.
Of course, you know, we don't have the resources. Most attorneys don't have special court appointed the resources without going to the court and having them give it and award it, or having a client who can afford it. But when you have let's switch for a second, you have someone who's accused of a crime, and there's corruption going on. There's something going on with the police. There's something you want to point out that he's being abused by the system. How do you do that? How do you take on the system like that?
It's really difficult. And as you said, it's hard enough when you're a disadvantaged individual to take on an honest system. But when you're an individual trying to take a system that has aspects of dishonesty or outright corruption in it, now you are really in trouble.
Right. You had a case with Inkster Police, right?
I did. It was the Inkster Police and the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office, the Chief Wayne County Drug Prosecutor, and the Inkster Police perjured an entire trial. This has now been admitted beyond pre-adventure or argument. They were all convicted. They were all jailed. The judge was also accused and participated in many aspects of it. This is a Wayne County Circuit judge, but was acquitted on appeal. I initially attempted to get government attention for that case by writing to the Attorney General and actually enclosing a transcript where the prosecutor admitted on the record, the one who was ultimately convicted, that they had perjured the testimony in the first trial. I sent that official transcript to the Attorney General's office saying, here, it's clear, please prosecute this case. I was ignored for 3 years. Absolutely no action whatsoever. So it's hard to even get their attention in the first place, much less, try and oppose the system.
And that's when you are taking on the system, and nobody knew that it was corrupt at the time. No, how many times do we get a client? We'll sit there and say, they either planted something or something happened. Of course, and as attorneys, of course, everybody wants to pick and prod and look through each individual cases. But there are many honest police officers, many honest prosecutors, most of them, and they will take care of, if they take care of their case, and if they're protecting the constitutional rights of our client along the way, there is sometimes many things you cannot do for the client other than you can make sure that there is the judge and the courts will treat them fairly. But when you get a crooked cop, when you get a prosecutor who's willing to bend the rules, you have to have someone believe you. And that's hard.
That is hard. I couldn't get anybody to believe me for the longest time, and that was the hardest part, even though it was in black and white. You just can't get people to accept. I don't believe that a judge would be involved in this. I don't believe that a prosecutor would be involved in this. And that is the first place you have to start, by trying to make those in authority believe you. And to do that, you have to have absolute proof. It's not enough just to have an indication of proof or a suggestion of proof. You have to have it in writing 5 ways from Sunday and indisputably before you can get anybody in the system to take the slightest action. And even then, there's a great deal of the old boy network, a great deal of politics, and a great deal of simple unwillingness to do anything about corruption in the courts or the police system.
We've had judges and we've had people that have running for office and have been elected officials. And one of the questions I want to ask you, because I know you've been involved in taking on the system and taking on government, is should we have them elected? Should we have judges elected? Maybe running for office, it's like you're running for a political office, whether it's President of the United States all the way down to the local dog catcher. It's the point of you have to promise things. And I'm not convinced that running for a judge, for instance, is the best way. Why shouldn't we have them appointed?
I think many are asking that question, and there's a lot of important arguments to be made regarding either method. I wanted to take hold of one point that you made earlier, and that is that the vast majority of judges, prosecutors, and policemen are honest, conscientious, very hard-working individuals who really are trying to protect us in society. As a matter of fact, no matter how rough a case I've had with a policeman or a prosecutor, and they all seem to be getting pretty rough these days, I thank them for protecting us, because they really are doing so. And as you observed, that's really the rule in most cases. The cases of corruption are rare. But with respect to the issue of elected versus appointed, the trouble is that if you appoint the most qualified, so to speak, who's going to determine who are the most qualified? Well, there's those folks you elected. Right. And we get, it's sort of
the
a
governor,
vicious,
the legislature, right?
Vicious circle.
But it's a political appointment. But the public, do they really know who's running for judge? Do they really know the background of people running for these kind of offices?
I think they don't, and I think you're right, and that's a significant problem. It's really up to the legal profession to try and educate people regarding
these kind of shows.
I think so.
That's exactly right.
This show does a public service. Anytime you have these issues discussed, anytime you have judicial candidates on, you do a great public service because people just need to be told, and as I say, I think the legal profession should take it upon themselves to write letters to their client. This is my opinion on the judges that are running. You're free to take it, ignore it, but here's what I think, and I'm in front of these people every day, and you know, if you're in favor of this kind of thing over that kind of thing, this is your judge. And if you're not concerned about, say, the rights of injured persons, but are more concerned with personal property rights and the rights of major corporations to do business in a certain manner, this is your judge.
So you think it's okay to steer people that you have that kind of influence? So the reason I say is I was listening this morning to National Public Radio, and they did a thing on endorsements by papers for what's going on with the election, and whether or not that makes any difference. Whether someone that you trust, if they're telling you who they believe that you should vote for, let's say president down to a judge, if that really makes the difference with the electorate.
I think it does, because I think that's how we make decisions about a lot of things these days. You know, this is a good dentist, this is a great program to watch, don't go see that movie, and gosh, that restaurant couldn't cook an omelet to save their life. We take a great deal of stock in personal recommendations.
Right, they have those websites right now, like Angie's and all those different websites that will talk about recommendations, whether it's the trips they're taking or the hotels. Why shouldn't we have that for people running for sheriff and prosecutor and judge and obviously for president?
I don't know about websites like Angie's, you know, list for political endorsements, but I do think that attorneys can take it upon themselves to communicate with their clients, or at least send them a postcard saying, if you have any questions about what we think about these candidates or these proposals, please contact us. That's inviting them to find another source of information from someone they presumably trust, and I think that's an integral part of the American political process that probably needs some strengthening. Would be a big help.
I think you're right, and I really appreciate you coming on, because it shows that an individual attorney who's got the background in government like you have can take on the government on behalf of the individual and still feel that you can influence the individual for local office, and basically I think that's the best way you can do it, is educate the public, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you
very much.
I think we have a duty to do so, and I salute your show. It's hard for an attorney to run a practice, run a family, and gosh, you know, maintain a cable show. I know how much difficulty is involved in putting on a quality show on a regular basis, and taking the time to do so really adds value.
I'm Scott Weinberg, and thank you for tuning in for another edition of Lawyer's View. Take care.